Chapter 1. A small error everyone forgave the first week of January is when New York pretends it has learned a lesson and then goes right back to cheating on it. The streets look scrubbed because the slush has been kicked into the gutters, and the people look scrubbed because the holiday faces have been replaced by office faces. Keycards beep, elevators sigh. Men in coats hurry as if the city will dock their pay if they arrive calm. At West 35th Street, the brownstone had resumed its own discipline, which is stricter than any corporation's. Fritz Brenner had resumed his pantry orders with the gravity of a general moving supplies. Theodore Horstman, who is called by his surname because it fits him, had resumed the morning paper routine with the certainty of a machine. I had resumed being the one who answers the doorbell and the telephone, which is less noble but more practical. Nero Wolfe had resumed being Nero Wolfe. He had been up to the plant rooms, of course. That is not something he resumes. It is something he continues, like breathing. The orchids occupy his mind the way other men's minds are occupied by worry. There is no room left in him for worry. He has replaced it with certainty, with schedules, with temperature and humidity and the correct angle of a leaf. If God ever needs a man to run weather properly, he should hire Wolfe and give him a greenhouse the size of Manhattan. When Wolfe came down the stairs that morning, he did it with the air of a man descending from a higher moral plane. He wore one of his comfortable suits, dark and neat, and the expression he reserves for a world that insists on being messy. Fritz followed with a tray that held Wolfe's breakfast on a warmed plate and my coffee on a saucer, plus the morning mail stacked like a small indictment. Wolfe sat, adjusted his napkin with ceremonial care, and said, "Archie." "Yes," I said. Because when Wolfe says my name with that tone, it means something is about to become my problem. "The city is noisy," Wolfe said. "The telephone will be more noisy. Do not allow it to distract you from competence." "I will try not to be distracted by competence," I said. Wolfe ignored that in the way he ignores most of what I say. That is not strictly relevant. He began to eat. Fritz stood by for a moment, eyes on Wolfe's plate, then vanished with the silent efficiency of a man who can manage a household without making it look like work. I opened the mail. Most of it was junk, which is an insult to junk, and 2 letters from people who wanted Wolfe's attention and were willing to pay for it. Wolfe tolerates money only because it buys orchids and food. He does not like the idea of money as a reason to do anything. He prefers pride. The doorbell rang at 10 minutes past 10, a time when you can expect either trouble or a salesman. I went to the hall, opened the door, and found a woman who looked as if she had stepped out of an office and into a mistake. She was in her 20s, bundled in a sensible coat, her hair pulled back too tightly, her hands clutching a folder as if it contained a live animal. She had the pale, alert face of someone who had spent too many nights looking at numbers and too few nights sleeping. She was not glamorous, not dramatic, not obvious trouble that made her more dangerous because obvious trouble gets noticed. "I'm looking for Mr. Wolfe," she said. "He is inside," I said. "If you are a bill collector, you will be disappointed." Her eyes flicked, confused. "Number? I'm not. I'm Jenna Cross." I held the door open. "Come in, Miss Cross. Wipe your feet. The brownstone has standards." She stepped in, scraped snow off her boots, and looked around as if expecting the walls to accuse her. People who come to Wolfe's house often do that. There is something about the brownstone that makes visitors feel they should explain themselves, even before Wolfe asks. Maybe it is the way the place is arranged with purpose. Maybe it is the knowledge that a man inside can make a fool of you while sitting in a chair. I led her to the office. Wolfe looked up from behind his desk, face blank, eyes sharp. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, voice tight. "I'm sorry to bother you. I know you probably have important work." Wolfe's mouth tightened slightly. "If it is important, you will tell me. If it is not, you will leave." That is Wolfe being polite. Jenna swallowed and stepped forward. "It's a tiny problem," she said. "It's probably nothing, but I noticed something, and I don't like it." I took my chair at my desk and opened my notebook. Wolfe does not like me taking notes in front of clients, but he tolerates it because he knows my memory is not as perfect as his pride. Wolfe said, "Proceed." Jenna clutched her folder. "I work at Ridgeway Tower. Not in a big role. Payroll and contractor invoices. Mostly, it is not my main job. It's a side assignment. In January, we get a flood of corrections, because everyone is back, everyone is catching up, and the system is always messy after the holiday." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "You are offering context. That usually means you are trying to excuse something." "I'm trying to explain why no one cared," she said quickly. "There was an invoice, an after-hours security bill. It was entered twice. Then it was corrected before finance saw it. A harmless duplication, a click, and you are here because you do not believe it was harmless," Wolfe said. Jenna nodded. "The correction did not erase the entry, it replaced the vendor name." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "Replaced, yes," she said, and her voice steadied a little, as if she was relieved to say it aloud. "The amount stayed the same. The date stayed the same. The service description stayed the same, but the vendor name changed quietly." Wolfe leaned back a fraction in his chair, which is what he does when his mind shifts from boredom to interest. "What were the two names?" Jenna opened her folder, hands trembling slightly, and produced a printout. It was entered as Pike Contracting, then it became Northdock Services. I watched Wolfe's face. It did not move, but the eyes changed. Wolfe does not like when people alter records. He considers records a form of truth, and he respects truth even when he does not respect people, Wolfe said. "And you believe the change was deliberate?" Jenna nodded. "The correction happened too cleanly. If you fix a mistake, you correct the mistake. You do not leave the mistake intact and put a different label on it. It is like changing a name on a check," Wolfe said. "Who has access to make such a change?" Jenna hesitated. "Managers, supervisors, the operations office. Maybe someone in security administration. The system is supposed to log it, but logs get buried." Wolfe's voice was quiet. "Somebody changed the name to hide the original vendor." "Yes," Jenna said. "And Pike Contracting is not a major vendor. They are a contractor that does odd jobs. After-hours work service, corridors, access doors." Wolfe's fingers tapped once on his desk. "You came because you thought it was suspicious, and because you feared it would touch you." Jenna flushed. "I'm not trying to protect myself. I don't like it. It feels wrong." Wolfe looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "How does this connect to my presence?" Before Jenna could answer, the telephone rang. I picked it up. "Goodwin," I said. Kramer's voice came at me like an unpleasant draft. "Where's Wolfe?" I glanced at Wolfe. "He is in his chair, which is where he always is." "Put him on," Kramer snapped. I held out the receiver to Wolfe. Wolfe took it, listened, and his eyes narrowed further. He did not move his face, but I could tell by the way he held the phone that Kramer was offering something not pleasant and possibly useful. Wolfe said, "Inspector." There was a pause. Wolfe listened. Then he said, "Yes," another pause. "Ridgeway Tower." Another. "When?" Wolfe's gaze flicked toward Jenna Cross. "Then back, I see." He listened again, then said, "Do not be melodramatic, Inspector. Accidents are common, but you are not calling about an accident." Kramer's voice came through loud enough that I heard scraps. "Service corridor, contractor, dead." Wolfe said, "Bring your facts. Do not bring your opinion." He hung up and placed the receiver down, as carefully as if it might break from the shock of truth. Wolfe looked at Jenna Cross. "Now answer my question. How does your invoice matter?" Jenna's face had gone pale. What did he say? Wolfe ignored her question, which is also Wolfe being polite. I said, "Kramer has a body at Ridgeway Tower. Contractor found dead in a service corridor." Jenna's eyes widened. "Warren Pike." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "So you know the contractor?" Jenna swallowed. "Not personally, just the name, Pike Contracting. Warren Pike is the owner. If he is dead..." Her voice trailed off and she gripped the folder harder. Wolfe sat very still. Tell me about this vendor correction again, precisely. Jenna nodded quickly, grateful for something she could control. The invoice was entered twice. Both entries were for after-hours, security coverage, service corridors, overnight access supervision. One entry stayed, the other was corrected. The amount stayed, the date stayed. The vendor name changed from Pike Contracting to Northdock Services. That change made it look internal, like a routine facilities allocation, not a contractor payment. Wolfe's voice was almost conversational, which meant he was fully engaged. Who entered it twice? Jenna hesitated. It was entered under a general queue. It could have been several clerks, but the correction required higher access. Wolfe nodded. And the correction occurred before finance could question it. Yes, Jenna said. That is what bothered me. It was corrected too quickly, too neatly. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Who told you it was harmless? My manager, Jenna said. She said it was just first. Weak adjustment January noise. Wolfe made a small sound of contempt. January is when schemes attempt to hide in noise. It is also when they are exposed by it. Habits do not reset overnight, and neither do schemes. Jenna looked at me as if seeking support. I gave her a small shrug. With Wolfe you do not get comfort. You get clarity. Comfort is Fritz's department, Wolfe said. You have done one competent thing. You noticed. Most people do not. Most people forgive small errors, because forgiveness saves effort. You did not forgive. Jenna swallowed. So what does it mean? Wolfe's gaze was steady. It means someone paid Pike Contracting for after. Hawes access, and then replaced the name to conceal it. Now Pike's owner is dead in a service corridor. That is not coincidence, that is structure, I said. Or it is the kind of coincidence that makes Wolfe allergic. Wolfe ignored that. Miss Cross, you will remain available. You will not speak of this to your manager or to anyone at Ridgeway Tower. Do you understand? Jenna nodded quickly. Yes. Wolfe turned his head slightly toward me. Archie, you will go to Ridgeway Tower with Inspector Kramer. You will examine the corridor. You will examine the habits. You will obtain the invoice logs, the correction trail, the access list for whoever can replace a vendor name, and any record of Pike Contracting's after-Hawes assignments. Yes, sir, I said. Wolfe added. You will also note, as you always should, who is too eager to forgive an error, Jenna said, voice small. I didn't do anything wrong, did I? Wolfe looked at her. His voice softened slightly, which, for Wolfe, is a miracle. If you had done wrong, Miss Cross, you would not be here. You would have stayed in the comfort of forgiveness. Jenna exhaled, some tension leaving her shoulders. The doorbell did not ring then. It did not need to. The case had already entered the house and sat down without being asked. A small accounting correction, a replaced vendor name, a dead contractor in a service corridor. That was enough to interest Wolfe, because it was enough to suggest someone thought he could change reality by changing a line on a bill. Wolfe leaned back and looked at me. Archie, take your coat. I already have it, I said. January makes me cautious. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. January makes fools confident. Do not be one. I stood, took my hat, and paused at the door of the office to glance back. Wolfe was already reaching for his beer. Not because he was done thinking, but because the thinking had begun to move. Outside, New York kept beeping and sighing, pretending it had forgiven itself for last year. Inside, Wolfe had found a small error everyone forgave, and he had decided to treat it as what it was. A signal. Chapter 2. The adjustment that was too neat. Ridgeway Tower has a way of making you feel as if you have already been approved, provided you keep moving and do not ask questions out loud. It is one of those midtown buildings that grew up on glass keycards and the belief that order equals safety. The lobby is wide, the lighting is flattering, and the security desk has the look of a place where bad news is processed politely and filed under procedure. On a January morning, that kind of order feels especially smug. The holiday mess has been swept behind closed doors. People have returned to their desks with tight smiles, and the building hums as if it never took a day off. That is the danger of January. Everyone wants to believe the calendar cleaned the slate, so they stopped looking at the smudges. Kramer met me at the entrance. Collar up, hat low, his face set in the usual expression that says the world is incompetent and he is forced to supervise it. His men were already inside with a uniformed building guard who looked as if he had been instructed to cooperate and resented it. "You got your precious invoice clerk here?" Kramer asked. "She's at the house," I said. "Wolfe told her not to talk to anyone, that includes you." Kramer snorted. "That figures. Where's your boss?" "He's at the brownstone," I said. "He believes buildings are more informative when someone else climbs the stairs." Kramer muttered something about armchairs and insanity, then jerked his head toward the bank of elevators. "Service corridor is on 18. Contractor found in an access hall that looks like it was designed by a man who hates sunlight." We rode up with 2 detectives. The elevator smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and new carpet adhesive. The walls were mirrored, which is always helpful when you want to watch someone without making it obvious. Kramer stared straight ahead, as if reflections were beneath him. On 18, the air changed. Offices give you heat and perfume, and the soft sound of money being made. Service floors give you colder air, and the smell of metal, dust, and whatever the building is hiding behind its clean face. The corridor where Warren Pike had been found was narrow, and painted a dull institutional beige, as if the building wanted it to vanish. Fluorescent lights buzzed, pipes ran along the ceiling like exposed veins. A red exit sign glowed with unnecessary urgency. Warren Pike lay on a gurney now, zipped and tagged, and already losing relevance in the way bodies do, once the first shock has passed. A contractor is convenient that way. People can grieve, but they can also dismiss. That is why criminals enjoy using men without titles as obstacles or tools. The detective on scene, a young one with a careful expression, gave me the summary. No clear struggle, one blunt impact to the back of the head. Not a fall, not accidental. The corridor camera is a partial. It catches the far end but not the service door itself. I looked toward the door. It was a heavy steel thing with a keypad and a badge reader. The kind of door that exists to keep regular people out and keep irregular activity in, Kramer said. "The building says it's secure." "The building always says that," I said. "Buildings have the same honesty level as their public relations office." Kramer grunted. "We got a badge log. That's something Pike's badge. Accessed the building at 11:30, 8 last night." That time landed in my mind like a coin in a slot. 11:38 was not routine maintenance time, not unless your routine includes keeping secrets. Contractors do sometimes work late, but they work late because someone wants them to, not because contractors enjoy midnight, I asked. "Who signed him in?" Kramer gestured toward a uniformed guard. The guard shifted his weight and looked as if he would rather be anywhere else, including the corridor with the corpse. The guard said, "Badge entry. Pike had credentials. The system logged him." I asked, "Did you see him?" The guard hesitated. "We see a lot of people." That was the first lie of the day. Not a big lie, but a useful one. "We see a lot of people" is the standard phrase for, "I do not want to be responsible for what I missed." Kramer said, "Who was on desk at 11:38? The guard nodded toward a door at the end of the corridor. "Operations coordinator, Nolan Reed. He handles vendor schedules and after Hawes access, he comes down sometimes." I made a note. Nolan Reed. The name sat on my tongue like a familiar taste, because I had heard it before from another Ridgeway story, and because names like that belong to men who keep things running smoothly and make a small religion out of it. Kramer said, "We're seeing him." We found Nolan Reed in an office that looked like a ship's bridge. Monitors on the wall, schedules pinned neatly. A whiteboard with colored lines and initials. The kind of room where people believe control can be achieved with enough checklists. Nolan Reed stood when we entered, smiling politely, as if homicide was an interruption to his calendar. He was in his 30s, neat hair, crisp shirt, no tie, the modern look of a man who thinks informality makes him approachable. His eyes were bright in a way that suggested he liked being the one who knew how things worked. "Inspector Kramer," he said smoothly. I'm Nolan Reed, Operations Coordinator. How can I help? Kramer's eyes narrowed. You can start by explaining why Warren Pike was in this building at 11:38 last night. Reed's smile did not falter. Pike was a contractor. He had routine maintenance tasks, service work, access doors, hinge adjustments, that sort of thing. That sort of thing got him killed, Kramer said. Reed's smile thinned. Yes, it's terrible, but he was just a contractor. We have dozens. I watched him carefully when he said just a contractor. It was a dismissal disguised as efficiency. If you say a man is just a contractor, you tell yourself his death is an event, not a catastrophe. That makes it easier to move on. It also makes it easier to hide. I said, show me his work orders. Reed turned to his computer with the practiced speed of a man who has been asked this before. He clicked through a system, typed, and brought up a digital form. Here, he said. Routine maintenance, door calibration, corridor sensor tests, nothing unusual. I leaned in. The work orders were dated. The language was generic, full of phrases like routine check and verify closure. It was the kind of description you can paste onto anything. A good lie always has a template, Kramer said. So why the hell was he here that late? Reed shrugged slightly. After, Ho's work is normal in January. We do tests when tenants are gone. Less disruption, I said. And his badge accessed the building at 11:38. Was that his first entry that day? It appears so, Kramer said. And no one saw him. Reed's eyes flicked. We have cameras. Kramer barked. Then show them. Reed hesitated for the first time. Not long, but long enough to register. There is a camera gap in the service corridor, he said. It's been scheduled for repair. It's listed. Kramer leaned forward. Scheduled by whom? Reed met his gaze. By operations, I said. Meaning you. Your Reed's smile returned, polite and controlled. I oversee schedules. Repairs are logged. I did not like the way he said logged. Men who say logged with pride usually mean it. Men who say it defensively usually mean the opposite. I said. We have an invoice question too. Reed's eyebrows rose slightly. Invoice? Yes, I said. And after, Ho's security escort bill entered twice, then corrected before finance questioned it. Time-stamped the same night Pike came in, corrected at 8:12 a.m. this morning. Reed's expression stayed neutral, but the eyes tightened a fraction. That sounds like a normal adjustment. Normal adjustments erase duplicates, I said. They do not replace vendor names. Reed's voice stayed smooth. We have many vendors. Sometimes the wrong vendor is selected in a template, Kramer said. What vendor name? Reed's gaze flicked again. I would need to see it. I did not show him anything. Wolfe had taught me that if you show a man the evidence, you give him a chance to start editing, I said. The corrected vendor name is Northdock Services. Reed's face did not move, but his eyes flickered. It was not as dramatic as Nolan Reed's flicker at Harbor Ledger in the last case, but it was there. A tiny hesitation, a moment of internal calculation. The kind of pause that tells you a name landed where it should not have. Northdock, Reed repeated, as if tasting it. I don't recognize it. That's interesting, I said. Because the finance team shrugged and said new year, new vendors, new paperwork, everybody's tired. Reed gave a small smile. That is true. January is chaotic. People make mistakes. I thought of Wolfe's contempt for tiredness as an excuse. Tiredness is how criminals rent invisibility, because tired people want to forgive errors and go back to their coffee. I asked Reed, who has the authority to change a vendor name in your security escort template? Reed's smile tightened. The security desk uses a standard template that auto-fills vendor names. Changing it requires admin access. Kramer's face hardened. Who has admin access? Reed's voice stayed calm. Certain operations staff it. Security management. Names, Kramer said. Reed hesitated, then said, I have access. So does our security chief. So does its support. It is controlled, Kramer snorted. Controlled, like the camera. Reed's cheeks colored slightly. Inspector, this is a large building. Systems are complex. Complex is not an excuse, I said. Complex is a cover. Someone didn't fix a typo. They rewrote a trail. Reed's eyes sharpened. You are making assumptions. I am making observations, I said. Warren Pike entered at 11:30. 8 he ends up dead in a service corridor, and after, Hoare's escort invoice tied to the same time is corrected neatly at 8:12 the next morning. The correction replaces the vendor name with Northdock Services, a company you claim not to recognize. And you tell me it is normal. Reed's voice stayed smooth, but now it had a little frost in it. You are implying wrongdoing without evidence. Kramer leaned in. We got a dead man. That's evidence. Reed's jaw tightened. We want to cooperate. Good, I said. Then you will give me the invoice log showing the original entry, the duplicate, and the correction trail. I want the user ID that made the correction at 8:12. Reed's eyes narrowed. That is finance information. Kramer's voice was blunt. It's homicide information now. Reed hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. I can request it. No, Kramer said. You can produce it now. That is why policemen are useful. Wolfe's contempt for police is mostly theatrical. He likes having Kramer around because Kramer can do something Wolfe cannot do from his chair. Kramer can stand in a man's office and make the air heavier. Reed turned back to his computer. His fingers moved quickly. He typed, clicked, and pulled up a screen with logs. I watched his hands. They were steady, but the speed was a little too eager, like a man trying to prove competence. He said, Here invoice entry, duplicate, correction. I leaned in. The screen showed an invoice for after Hoare's escort. It had been entered twice. Then at 8:12 a.m., it had been edited. The vendor name had been changed from Pike Contracting to Northdock Services. The amount was identical. The description identical. The time window identical, I said. Show me the user ID. Reed's lips tightened. It is coded. I can read, I said. He clicked again. The editor field showed an admin-level ID, not a personal name, but a system account tied to operations. Admin template account, I said. Reed nodded. Yes, it is used for standardized adjustments. That is convenient, I said. A standardized account to do non-standard things. Kramer's face darkened. Who used it? Reed's voice stayed controlled. Access is restricted. There are protocols, I said. Protocols do not press keys. People press keys. Reed looked at me sharply. We will investigate internally. Kramer barked. No, we will. Reed's jaw tightened. Inspector, the building must function. Kramer leaned forward. Then you should have thought of that before a contractor ended up dead behind your perfect locks. Reed's eyes narrowed. We did not kill him, I said. Maybe not, but someone in your building rewrote his payment trail the morning after his death. That suggests they were worried about what the invoice would reveal. Kramer said, What is Northdock Services? Reed shrugged slightly, too casual. A vendor name, possibly a parent company, possibly a subcontractor, possibly a fake, I said. Reed's eyes flashed. That is speculation. Yes, I said. And your job is to reduce speculation with records. Yet your record shows an adjustment that is too neat. Kramer turned to me. What does Wolfe want? I pulled out my notebook and read Wolfe's instruction back to him, because sometimes the simplest way to keep a policeman cooperative is to remind him someone else is watching. Wolfe wants to find who had the habit of changing records before anyone asked, I said. He says tiredness is how criminals rent invisibility. Kramer grunted. That sounds like Wolfe. I looked at Reed. Do you have a habit of changing records before anyone asks, Mr. Reed? Reed's smile returned, but it was thin. I have a habit of keeping the building running. I said. That is not an answer. It is a slogan. Reed's eyes tightened. Mr. Goodwin, you are out of your depth. This building is full of systems, templates, auto-fills. It is easy for clerks to click the wrong thing. That is why we have admin access to correct it. And easy for someone with admin access to click the right wrong thing, I said. Kramer snapped. All right, we're done with philosophy. I want full access logs for that admin template account. I want who logged in, from what terminal, and at what time. I want the security desk template change history. I want camera repair schedule, who signed it, and why it wasn't fixed. And I want Pike's full after-hours assignments from December through now. Reed's face stiffened. That is extensive, Kramer said. So is murder. Reed exhaled slowly, then nodded. We will provide what we can. You will provide what you have, Kramer said. What you can is not relevant. As we left Reed's office, I caught a glimpse of his reflection in the corridor window. His face was calm again, but his eyes were sharper, colder. He looked like a man who had been nudged off his preferred script and did not enjoy it. Kramer and I walked back toward the service corridor. I glanced at the door where Pike had been found and thought about the building's habit of forgiving small errors. Doors that do not latch unless pulled hard. Cameras angled slightly away. Admin accounts used for tidy adjustments, all of it ordinary, all of it useful. In the lobby, I stopped by the security desk. The guard on duty looked tired, which meant he was dangerous without knowing it. I asked, "Show me the vendor template you use for after-hours, escort invoices." The guard blinked. "That's finance." "It's also your desk," I said. "Show me." He hesitated, then called over a supervisor, a woman with a clipped voice and a badge that said Security Operations. She looked annoyed until Kramer's badge spoke for us. She pulled up a screen. The template auto-filled vendor names from a drop-down. Pike Contracting was listed. Northdock Services was listed too. It sat there like a clean lie among messy truths, I said. Who added Northdock Services to this drop-down? The supervisor frowned. It's been there. Since when? I asked. She clicked through a settings history panel, and her frown deepened. It shows it was added 2 weeks ago. January, I said. She looked at me warily. Yeah. Who has admin rights to modify this list? I asked. She hesitated. Operations admin accounts. Nolan Reed. It's security chief. Kramer grunted. Everybody. I said, not everybody. The list of people who can do a thing is always smaller than the list of people who complain about it. On the way out, I called Wolfe from the sidewalk. Cold hit my face like a slap. The city was moving fast, forgiving itself, and Ridgeway Tower rose behind me like a clean lie. Wolfe answered on the second ring, as if he had been waiting for my voice. "The port," he said. "Nolan Reed dismisses Pike as just a contractor," I said. Pike badge accessed at 11:30. 8 p.m. work orders claim routine maintenance. Generic, the invoice. Jenna flagged is after, Hawes escort, time-stamped same night, corrected at 8:12 a.m. this morning. Vendor name was replaced. Now it reads Northdock Services. No one recognizes it, but it appears in the security template drop-down, added 2 weeks ago. Changing the template requires admin access. Correction was made using an admin template account, not a personal ID. Someone didn't fix a typo. They rewrote a trail. Wolfe was silent a moment, then said, "Excellent, and your impression of Mr. Reed?" "He is smooth," I said. "He likes being the one who keeps things running." He also hesitated when I mentioned Northdock. Wolfe's voice was dry. Hesitation is often the only honesty we get. Kramer was listening beside me, and I could tell he wanted to grab the phone and shout. He restrained himself, which for Kramer counts as progress. Wolfe said, "Archie, find who had the habit of changing records before anyone asked. The habit is more revealing than the act. Also, locate Northdock Services. If it is real, it has a trail. If it is false, it has a purpose. In either case, it will lead us to why Warren Pike was in a corridor at midnight, and why someone cared enough to rename his invoice by morning." "Yes, sir," I said. Wolfe added, "Do not allow tired people to excuse anything. Tiredness is a narcotic. It makes crime feel like routine." I hung up and looked at Kramer. He said, "We got enough to start squeezing." "We have enough to start watching who squirms," I said. "Wolfe prefers squirming. It is more honest than talking," Kramer snorted. "You and Wolfe and your psychology." I tucked my notebook into my coat and glanced back at Ridgeway Tower. The building stood there with its clean face, its beeping key cards, its sighing elevators, its confident belief that paperwork is reality. Somewhere inside it, a small adjustment had been made too neatly, and a man had died in a corridor nobody liked to notice. January had resumed its rhythm, so had Wolfe. Chapter 3. Habits that don't reset by the third day of January. New York had stopped pretending the holidays were still a valid excuse. The sidewalks were no longer decorated with good cheer, only with salt stains and the stubborn gray slush that the city carries like a badge of endurance. People moved fast again. Shoulders set, faces tightened, as if every minute spent outdoors was an insult to their income. Inside Ridgeway Tower, the air was warmer and more expensive, but not kinder. I have been in enough buildings like that to know the difference. Warmth is not comfort when it is rationed by policy. I had the invoice logs in my briefcase and the kind of irritation that comes when you smell a pattern but cannot yet name the person who owns it. Wolfe calls that irritation a useful discomfort. I call it a headache with ambition. I went back to the brownstone first, because Wolfe believes facts should be brought to him while they are still fresh, like oysters. Fritz opened the front door before I could ring. He always does that when I am carrying trouble. I have never been sure whether he senses it by instinct or by the way my shoes sound on the steps. "You are early," Fritz said. "I am always early when the city is lying," I said. Fritz's mouth made the smallest movement that might have been amusement. He took my coat, then added, "Mr. Wolfe is upstairs with the plants. He said you may wait or you may come up if you are quiet." "Quiet is not my natural state," I said, and went up anyway. The plant rooms were sealed and humid, a tropical kingdom hovering above a winter city. The glass panels fogged at the edges, the air smelled of damp bark, clean soil, and the faint sweet sharpness of blooms that cost more than some men's honesty. Wolfe stood among the benches, immense and careful, inspecting an orchid with a lens. The light from the lamps made his face look carved, stern and serene all at once. He did not look up when I entered. He said, "Report." "That is a greeting now," I said. Wolfe's hand adjusted a leaf as gently as if he were correcting a child's collar. "Do not be foolish, facts." I opened my briefcase, pulled out the printouts, and handed them to him. He took them as if they were contaminated and might stain his fingers with stupidity. "I pulled last month's invoices from Ridgeway," I said. "Late December through yesterday, I found a pattern." Wolfe's eyes moved over the pages, quick and exact. "Proceed." "Small duplicated charges appear in late December," I said. "Always something that looks harmless. After hours escort fees, corridor access support, vendor compliance checks. The duplicates are always corrected early morning, usually between 7:45 and 8:30. The correction never simply deletes. It replaces." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Replaces what?" "The vendor name," I said. "Pike Contracting becomes Northdock Services, or a different internal vendor label. The amount stays. The time stays. The description stays. Only the name changes, which changes who is accountable." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "And the same person signs off." "Yes," I said. "The correction approval line is always Mason Klein, finance supervisor." Wolfe finally looked up, gaze sharp. "You are certain?" "As certain as I am about anything that comes out of a corporate system designed to make certainty difficult," I said. "But yes, same sign, off ID, same initials, same time window. It's habit." Wolfe's eyes returned to the papers. "Habits do not reset," he said. "That's what I told you yesterday," I said. Wolfe ignored me and continued scanning. "How many instances?" 8 in late December, I said. 2 in the first week of January so far. The one Jenna flagged was simply the one that had Pike's name on it. that made it personal. The others are tucked under labels that sound internal. Wolfe set the pages down carefully on a side table, away from the orchids, as if the paper might offend them. "You will see, Mr. Klein." "I already planned to," I said. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Do it correctly. A man who approves neat corrections is either diligent or complicit. Diligence is boring. Complicity is profitable." "Do you want him brought here?" I asked. "Not yet," Wolfe said. "First observe him in his natural habitat. People are more truthful when they believe they are still in control of their surroundings." That is Wolfe's idea of a nature documentary. I left the plant rooms, went down to the office, and called Kramer. He answered with the same tone he uses for telemarketers and relatives. "Goodwin," he said, "tell me you've got something that makes this worth my time." "I have a finance supervisor named Mason Klein, who signs off the same neat corrections every morning, including late December," I said. "And I have a dead contractor who was nervous about seeing something in a ledger." Kramer grunted. "That's better," Lab confirmed. Pike was struck, not a fall. One blunt impact, placed afterward to look like a slip. Wolfe's voice carried from the doorway behind me, as if he had followed my call by instinct, staging an accident. He said aloud, not to Kramer, "Is the physical version of correcting an invoice." I covered the receiver and said to Wolfe, "You are eavesdropping." "I am supervising," Wolfe replied. I went back to Kramer. "We're seeing Mason Klein today," Kramer said. "I'll send a detective to lean on Ridgeway if they start stalling. You keep me posted." I hung up and put on my coat again. Fritz appeared with my hat, like a man preparing me for a weather hazard. "Do you want lunch before you go?" Fritz asked. "I want a confession before lunch," I said. "But I'll settle for coffee." Fritz handed me a cup. The coffee was hot, honest, and better than most of the city's agreements. I drank it, fast, and left. Ridgeway Tower's finance offices were on a floor that smelled like printer toner and quiet pressure. People there speak softly, not out of respect, but because loud voices attract attention, and attention attracts questions. Questions are dangerous to anyone who relies on invoices. Mason Klein's office was not large. It did not need to be. Power in finance is not expressed by square footage, but by access and approval rights. His door had his name on a neat plaque, as if his authority could be summarized in engraved letters. I knocked and entered without waiting too long, because if you wait too long outside a finance office, someone decides you require permission. Mason Klein stood when I came in, polite, surprised, and cautious. He was in his 40s, clean cut, with the kind of face that looks competent even when it is lying. He wore glasses that made his eyes seem patient. His desk was tidy, which is always suspicious. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "from the Wolfe Agency." "That's right," I said. "I'm Archie, you're Mason." "I'm afraid I'm not sure how I can help," he said, and I could hear the trained tone of a man who believes helping should always be defined by policy. "I'm here about a small adjustment," I said. He smiled faintly. "We do adjustments daily." "Yes," I said, "and you approve them." His smile held. "That is my job." "I pulled last month's invoices," I said, and watched his eyes. "There's a pattern, duplicated charges in late December, corrected early morning. Vendor name replaced, not erased. You sign off every time." His eyes flickered at the words, late December. It was small, but it was there. "Most men can keep their faces smooth. Their eyes are harder to train," he said. "December is always messy, year, end rush, vendors change, January cleanup." "The pattern existed before January," I said. Mason's smile tightened. "We begin cleanup in late December, that is standard. I supervise it. It happens." "It happened 10 times in 2 weeks," I said. Mason's smile thinned. "Ridgeway is a large operation." I walked to his desk without asking, because asking would have given him time. I placed one of the printouts in front of him and tapped it. "Here's the one Jenna Cross noticed. Pike contracting becomes Northdock Services." "Who is Northdock Services?" Mason looked at the page, then looked up. A vendor nobody recognizes, I said. Not operations, not security, not finance staff I talked to yesterday. He spread his hands slightly. That does not mean it isn't legitimate. Vendors are added constantly. Who adds them? I asked. Procurement and vendor management, he said. Finance does not create vendors. We approve invoices. But you approve a correction that changes vendor identity, I said. That is not passive approval. That is active alteration. Mason's eyes sharpened slightly. Mr. Goodwin, if you are implying misconduct, you should speak to our legal department. I smiled. I am speaking to you because you are the one whose initials appear on every neat correction. Mason took a slow breath. I sign off because I am responsible for clean books. Clean books, I said, like a clean corridor camera feed that has a gap labeled system restart. His eyes tightened. Camera feed. Yes, I said. The corridor feed from 11:30 to midnight is missing, labeled system restart. That is another neat adjustment. The kind of thing people accept because they are tired and want to move on. Mason's voice cooled. Security systems are not my domain. No, I said, but habits are. You have a habit of cleaning up before anyone asks. That was Wolfe's phrase, not mine. Mason's expression shifted slightly at Wolfe's name. Most people do that. Wolfe is a rumor with a chair, he said. We are cooperating with the police in every way. I'm sure you are, I said. Tell me about Warren Pike. Mason blinked once. I didn't know him. You knew his company name well enough to approve replacing it, I said. Mason's jaw tightened. Again, systems select names. Errors happen. I leaned in slightly. Warren Pike told a coworker he saw something in the ledger that wasn't his business. He was nervous. Then he comes into this building at 11:30, and ends up dead in a service corridor. The next morning, his name is replaced on an invoice at 8:12. That is not an error. That is a response. Mason's face stayed controlled, but his fingers moved on the desk, a subtle tapping that betrayed stress. He said, if Pike was killed, that is a tragedy. But it does not mean a finance correction is related. It means someone wanted his name gone from the record, I said. Mason's voice hardened. Or someone wanted the correct vendor name applied. That is all. I watched him, then said casually, show me the correction cue. His eyes sharpened. That is internal. Show me, I repeated. He hesitated, then stood and moved to his computer, because refusing would have looked worse than complying. He clicked through screens. I watched his hands, steady but fast. He pulled up a queue of adjustments, most of them dull. There, he said, pointing. Corrections standard. I leaned in. The interface showed entries, Idaho, S timestamps, and approval flags. The late December ones were there. I said, who submits these corrections? Mason's lips tightened. Clerks, sometimes operations requests. Names, I said. He scrolled reluctantly. A list appeared. Some were anonymous queue entries. Some had initials. A few were tied to a user ID that repeated. One ID repeated more than others, always in the early morning window. It belonged to someone in vendor management, not a clerk. I said, who is that? Mason's eyes narrowed. That is vendor management. Which person? I said. Mason stared at the screen a moment too long, then said, it could be several. It repeats, I said. So it is one. His jaw tightened. Mr. Goodwin, you are not authorized to view this. I smiled. Then you should stop showing it. He flushed slightly, realizing he had stepped into his own trap. That happens to men who think systems protect them. Systems only protect the men who control them, I said. I want the name tied to that ID. Mason's voice was tight. I can't give you that. You can, I said. You are choosing not to. Mason straightened. You have no authority here. Authority is a habit too, I said. Warren Pike died because someone in this building believes authority can be faked and records can be edited. Wolfe believes the same thing. except he believes it can be undone. Mason's eyes flashed. Is this a threat? It's a forecast, I said. I left his office without waiting for permission because I had what I needed. Not a confession, but a stress point. Mason Klein was either protecting someone, or he was the someone. In either case, he was too invested in explaining away patterns. I went straight to the service level again, because Wolfe always says you should revisit a place once you have new questions. Places do not change. Your eyes do. Kramer's detective met me by the corridor. He handed me a lab summary. Pike was struck from behind, he said. He didn't fall. Then he was placed. Whoever did it wanted it to look like a slip. I nodded. And someone wanted it to look like a clean correction. The detective frowned. What? Never mind, I said. Tell me about the camera gap. He gestured to a technician who was standing by a panel. System restart, the technician said. That's what the log says. 11:30 to midnight. It's a recorded gap. A restart that happens conveniently during the murder window, I said. The technician shrugged. Systems restart. Do they restart often? I asked. He hesitated. Sometimes, scheduled maintenance. Show me the restart history, I said. He looked toward the detective who nodded. The technician pulled up a log. It was a list of restarts, timestamps, notes. There were several in late December, always late at night, always labeled system restart, always on service corridor feeds. I felt a small chill that had nothing to do with the building's temperature. This is a habit, I said. The technician frowned. What do you mean? I mean someone has been taking the cameras blind on purpose and labeling it like a routine glitch. I said, not just last night, in late December too. He looked uneasy. That would require admin access. Everything requires admin access, I said. That's why admin access is the first suspect in any modern crime. I stepped back from the panel and looked down the corridor, letting my eyes follow the pipes, the doors, the corners where light did not reach. Warren Pike had been killed here and placed like a piece of furniture. Someone had wanted a story that required no struggle, no mess, no questions. An accident, a correction. I pulled out my phone and called Wolfe. He answered immediately, as if he had been sitting with the receiver in his hand. Archie, he said, what have you learned? Mason Klein signs off every neat correction, late December and early January, I said. He claims it's cleanup. He got tense when I pressed. The correction queue shows the same admin template account and a repeating vendor management ID submitting early morning changes. He refused to name it, but it exists. Also, the corridor camera feed gap was labeled System Restart, and the restart history shows several similar gaps late December on service corridor feeds. Wolfe, it's a routine. Someone has been taking cameras blind and filing it under maintenance. Wolfe was silent a moment, then said, Excellent. That's your word for everything, I said. It is an appropriate word when you do useful work, Wolfe replied. Now you see the structure. Duplicated charges, corrected early morning camera gaps, labeled restart, an accident staged to look like a slip. It is all the same impulse, replace reality with a version that passes without scrutiny. So routine is the suspect, I said. Yes, Wolfe said. Routine is now the suspect, and the mistake is its first confession. I looked down the corridor again. The fluorescent lights buzzed, indifferent. The door at the end sat closed, heavy, as if it had secrets inside. Wolfe's voice continued. Colder. Archie. Find the person behind the repeating vendor management ID. Find who can add Northdock Services to templates. Find who can authorize camera restarts without repair. That person is either the author or the necessary accomplice. When you have that name, we will arrange an office gathering. The guilty will come because they will believe it is another routine meeting they can manage, I said. And they will discover the routine has changed. Wolfe's voice was quiet. Precisely, go on. I hung up and tucked the phone away. The city outside was still moving fast, forgiving errors because forgiveness is quicker than thought. Inside Ridgeway Tower, someone had been using that forgiveness like a tool. Habits do not reset. They repeat until someone refuses to forgive them. Chapter 4. The mistake that points to a door. If you want to understand a building, you do not study the lobby. The lobby is what the building wants you to see. You study the places where the building keeps its embarrassment: service corridors, utility closets, doors with scuff marks that suggest someone has been impatient more often than anyone admits. Ridgeway Tower had plenty of embarrassment. I went back in the afternoon, not because I enjoy fluorescent lighting and painted cinder block, but because Wolfe had said routine was the suspect. And routine lives where people stop paying attention. The offices upstairs were back to their January rhythm, with people drinking coffee and pretending to be responsible. Down in the service levels, the rhythm was different. It was quieter, and the quiet felt practiced. Kramer's men were still around, but thinner now. A homicide does not shut down a tower. It merely inconveniences it, and buildings hate inconvenience. The security desk had resumed its confident posture, and the guards had resumed their tone of mild annoyance at anyone who interrupted their screens. I showed my face, nodded to a uniform I recognized, and took the service elevator to the level where Warren Pike had been found. The corridor looked the same as earlier: beige paint, buzzing lights, pipes like exposed nerves. But a place never looks the same twice. When your mind has changed, Wolfe calls that the advantage of returning. I call it the penalty of thinking. I walked slowly, letting my eyes do the work. The spot where Pike had been placed was still marked with chalk and tape. The tape looked ridiculous against the dull wall, like a bright ribbon tied on a garbage can. A man died there, and the building wanted it processed and forgotten. I looked at the floor and the baseboards. You can learn a lot from the floor, because floors are honest. They take the weight, they collect what falls. Near the stairwell door, I found a faint smear on the paint at shoulder height, like a hand had steadied itself there. The paint was slightly darker, as if it had been touched with a glove that carried grease. That was not new. That was routine. A few feet down the corridor was the door I had not noticed before, because it did not want to be noticed. It was a heavy utility door, steel, painted the same beige as the wall, with a small label that said Storage A, which was about as informative as calling the Atlantic Ocean a puddle. The door had a keypad and a badge reader. The badge reader's plastic casing had a small scratch across it, the kind you get when someone regularly swipes too fast and hits the edge. The latch area had scuff marks, not on the floor this time, but on the door frame near the bolt. Dark arcs of abrasion, as if something hard had been rubbed there repeatedly. I leaned in, close enough to smell metal. The scuffs were recent. The paint was worn down to a darker layer beneath. That door had been used with impatience. I tried the handle, locked. I stepped back and looked around. No one in sight. A camera at the far end, but I already knew this corridor had a habit of going blind. I did not want to test that habit by standing there like a man trying to burglarize a storage room. So I did what I always do when I need access. I asked someone who thinks it is their job to deny it. I walked to the end of the corridor, where a security panel station sat behind a half door, a little nook with monitors and a chair. A guard was there, older, with a heavy face and tired eyes. He looked as if his January had already lasted a year. I showed my credentials. "I'm with Inspector Kramer," I said, which was true enough to be useful. The guard sighed. "Everybody's with Kramer." "That's because he has the body," I said. "I need access to Storage A." The guard frowned. "Why?" "Because a man died in this corridor," I said. "And that door looks like it has been used more than anyone talks about." The guard shifted. "It's a storage room." "Everything is a storage room until it becomes evidence," I said. He stared at me a moment. Then he reached for a ring of keys, large enough to qualify as a personal burden. "I can open it, but you don't go in alone policy." "Policy," I said. "That word is Ridgeway's religion." He stood and lumbered down the corridor with me as we approached the door. I watched his hands. He was slow, careful. A man like this does not make neat corrections. He makes tired ones. That made him less dangerous. He inserted a key, turned it, and the lock clicked. Then he entered a code on the keypad. The light on the reader flashed green. He pulled the handle hard, and the door opened with a sigh. The room inside was smaller than I expected and cleaner. It had metal shelving, a desk bolted to the wall, a plastic bin for petty supplies, and, in the corner, a small wall safe with a drop slot. The safe was the sort you see in restaurants and small stores, where cash is collected and deposited without drama. It was out of place in a tower that pretends everything runs on keycards and spreadsheets. That alone made it interesting. The room smelled faintly of paper, dust, and a sharper odor like old envelopes. There was also a faint tang of disinfectant. Someone had cleaned recently, but not carefully enough to remove everything. "Who uses this room?" I asked. The guard shrugged. "Operations facilities, sometimes finance. It's for petty stuff, supply purchases, cash drop things that don't fit the corporate system. That's a polite way of saying, it's where money goes when it does not want to be tracked," I said. The guard frowned. "I don't know about that." I did not blame him. Guards know doors and faces, they rarely know motives. I walked in, careful not to touch much, and scanned the desk. There were a few pens, a clipboard, and a stack of printed forms that looked like a log sheet, mostly blank. On the floor under the desk, near the back corner where a broom would miss, I saw a small rectangular piece of paper, like a torn stub. He crouched and picked it up with the edge of my glove. The paper was thicker than ordinary scrap, and it had a stamp mark on it. The stamp read escort fee. I felt a small tightening in my chest, the kind you get when a clue snaps into place with a sound only you can hear. The guard leaned in. "What's that?" I held it up. A forgotten stub. He squinted. "Looks like escort fee." "Yes," I said, "and that happens to be the category of the duplicated invoice that started this mess." He frowned. So, I said, "the invoice wasn't about escorting a contractor, it was about escorting money." He stared. Money. I stood, still holding the stub. The stamp was clean, and beneath it was a faint handwritten number, partial, like the beginning of an amount. The rest had been torn away. I asked the guard, "Who stamps these?" He shrugged again. "No idea. Maybe finance, maybe facilities. Whoever handles petty cash." I glanced at the wall safe. The drop slot had faint scratches around it, as if envelopes had been shoved in quickly. The safe was locked, of course. I looked at the shelf. A few boxes of gloves, cleaning supplies, a roll of tape, and tucked behind a box, an empty envelope with the corner torn off. The envelope was plain, but it had the same escort fee stamp in the corner. Someone had been doing this often enough to have a stamp, and someone had been sloppy enough to leave a stub. He thanked the guard and told him to wait outside while I called Kramer. He did not like that, but he accepted it. People accept many things when you say homicide. I stepped into the corridor, closed the door behind me, and called Kramer. He answered with the voice of a man who was about to bark. "Yeah, Archie," I said. "I found something." "That's what you always say," Kramer growled. "Make it good." "I found a locked utility door in the service corridor," I said. "Scuff marks near the latch. It opens into a storage room with a wall safe and petty cash set up. Inside, I found an envelope stub stamped escort fee. Same category as the duplicated invoice," Jenna flagged. There was a pause. Kramer's voice hardened. "You saying they were moving cash?" "I'm saying the escort fee isn't just a service description," I said. "It's a code, an internal phrase for money movement." And the correction in the system replaced Pike, contracting with Northdock Services. "That smells like rerouting." Kramer muttered. "Damn it." "Also," I added, "Warren Pike was found dead in that corridor. If he saw something in the ledger, this room might be part of it." Kramer said. "Stay there. Don't touch anything. I'll send someone." "I already touched one stub," I said, "but only enough to keep it from being swept away." Kramer made a harsh sound. "You always think of the dust." "It's my hobby," I said. "Send your man." And Kramer, Tell your lab to look at the scuff marks on that door. They're not casual, Kramer said. Fine. I hung up and called Wolfe, because Wolfe had earned the right to hear the clue first. He answered immediately, as if the call had been part of his schedule. Report. I found a locked utility door with scuff marks near the latch in the corridor where Pike died, I said. It opens into a storage room used for petty supply purchases and cash drop. Offs, there's a wall safe with a drop slot. I found an envelope stub stamped escort fee, matching the duplicated invoice category. Wolfe was silent for a moment, and I could picture him in his office, eyes half closed, translating the information into structure. Then he said, "Excellent. You love that word," I said. "It is appropriate," Wolfe replied. "Continue." "I think the escort fee is not about escorting a contractor," I said. "It's about escorting money." Wolfe's voice went colder, sharper. "Yes, the description is a mask. The stamp is the truth. If cash is moved through that room, the invoice duplicates are likely a mechanism, not an error." "That's what it smells like," I said. Wolfe said, "Then we will formalize the smell into a method. Consider it. A duplicate charge appears. It is corrected, not erased, but relabeled. The result is an overpayment on record, followed by a refund. The refund is routed to a shell vendor." I felt the structure settle. "A refundable overpayment," I said, "like generating a false credit." "Precisely," Wolfe said. "A neat theft. It does not steal, it refunds. Refunds are forgiven more readily than theft because they sound like rectification." I said, "And Northdock Services is the shell." Wolfe replied, "It is likely, you will verify." "I already started," I said. "The vendor name appears in the security template dropdown, added 2 weeks ago. I can check corporate registration records next." "Do so," Wolfe said. "Also, the person who approves refunds during the first week backlog is crucial." "Mason Klein," I said. "He signs off the corrections." Wolfe's voice softened slightly, not in kindness, but in satisfaction at a narrowing. "Yes, and Ridgeway's first week backlog provides an excuse for reduced oversight. This is what criminals enjoy. The first week is where thieves hide, because everyone expects wobble." I looked down the corridor, at the closed door, at the clean beige paint, pretending nothing ever happened. "Anything else you want?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "You will determine whether Mr. Klein entered the building unusually early after Pike's death. Such men enjoy checking their handiwork before others arrive." I blinked. "I can check badge logs." "Do," Wolfe said. "Then return to me with times. Times are stubborn. They do not forgive." I hung up. Kramer's detective arrived 20 minutes later, a thick-necked man with the kind of expression that says he enjoys a clear chain of custody. He put on gloves, photographed the room, and began cataloging. I pointed out the stub, the envelope, the safe, and the door scuff marks. He whistled softly at the safe. "You think there's cash in there?" he asked. "I think there has been cash in there," I said. "And I think people have been using it without wanting the corporate system to see." He nodded. "We'll get a warrant." "Jet it fast," I said. "Buildings swallow evidence, the way gutters swallow snow." While the detective worked, I went back downstairs to the security desk and requested the badge logs for Mason Klein under the thin disguise of routine investigation. The supervisor frowned, but Kramer's name opened doors like a master key. They printed a log. Mason Klein's badge had entered Ridgeway Tower at 6:05 a.m. The morning after Warren Pike's death, that time hit me with the clean force of a well-thrown brick. Finance supervisors do not stroll into towers at 6 in the morning unless they love exercise or hate surprises. Mason Klein did not look like a man who loved exercise. I copied the entry and added it to my notes. On my way out, I passed the security supervisor again and asked casually, "What time do you usually see Mason Klein come in?" She shrugged. 8:30, sometimes 9. He's finance. They like later hours." "Not yesterday," I said. She frowned. "What?" "Nothing," I said, "just noticing January habits." Back outside, The city wind slapped me again. Midtown was loud and impatient. People marched with coffee cups as if caffeine were a credential. The sky was the color of old paper. I went straight back to the brownstone, because Wolfe would want those times like a man wants the correct temperature in a greenhouse. Inside, the brownstone was warmer, quieter, and smelled faintly of whatever Fritz had decided would keep Wolfe from committing murder out of irritation. There was a deep comfort to the place that always felt slightly undeserved, because so many ugly things were brought through its front door. Wolfe was in the office, as expected, already seated, already composed. The beer was at his right hand. The orchids were above him, distant and perfect, as if refusing to acknowledge the world's mess. I handed him the log printout. He glanced at it once. 6:05, he said. Yes, I replied. Unusually early. Security says he typically arrives 8:30 or 9. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. He came to ensure the correction occurred. Or to make sure the stub in the storage room wasn't visible, I said. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Or both. I sat at my desk and began sorting my notes. Northdock Services is still a mystery, I said. No one recognizes it. It shows up in drop-down templates and on corrected invoices. If it's a shell, it's a mailbox. If it's real, it's a front. Wolfe nodded slowly. You will locate it. I will, I said, and the method seems clear now. Duplicate a charge, approve a correction, generate an overpayment, route a refund. Wolfe's eyes were cold. Yes, and Warren Pike, being a contractor, perhaps saw the cash movement, or saw the ledger entry that revealed the mechanism. He was not meant to see it. Therefore, he was removed and placed to look like an accident. Like an invoice correction, I said. Wolfe's gaze held mine. Yes, staging is a habit. It appears in paper and in bodies. Fritz appeared quietly, bearing a tray with food. Wolfe's lunch was arranged like an argument, deliberate and confident. Mine was more practical. Fritz set it down, looked at Wolfe, then at me, then said softly, Mr. Wolfe, the roast is ready. Wolfe said, Thank you, Fritz. Fritz left. Wolfe did not touch his plate immediately. He stared at the paper in front of him with the same attention he gives an orchid bloom. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but not gentle. The first week is where thieves hide, Wolfe said. Because everyone expects wobble, they call it adjustment, they call it cleanup, they call it January. He lifted his eyes. Archie, we will stop expecting wobble. We will force rigidity. I chewed a bite of sandwich and said, Meaning. Meaning. Wolfe said, We will identify the person who can approve refunds without secondary review. We will identify the creator of Northdock Services. We will identify who has admin rights to edit the escort fee template. Then we will bring them here, not one at a time together. The guilty rely on isolation. They rely on separate conversations and separate excuses. We will deny them that. I swallowed. You're planning the office gathering. Wolfe nodded once. Soon, not yet. The gathering requires completeness. When I gather, I conclude. I looked out the window at the street, where January had turned the city into a ledger of grey and movement somewhere. In a tower of glass and policy, someone had believed a small error would be forgiven because everyone was tired. Wolfe had refused to forgive it. And now the mistake had pointed to a door. Chapter 5. Routine exposes intent. There are days when Inspector Kramer sounds like a man whose temper is a public utility. And then there are days when he sounds like a man who has discovered something he can put in handcuffs. This was the second kind. He called at 11:30, which in Wolfe's household is the hour when Fritz is finishing a sauce and Wolfe is deciding whether the world deserves to keep existing. I answered, and Kramer's voice came through like a heavy door being opened. We got refund records, he said. Your fathead was right. Northdock's getting money. I glanced at Wolfe. He was at his desk. Napkin still folded beside his plate, the remnants of lunch set aside as if nourishment were an interruption. His eyes narrowed slightly, the only sign he had been listening before I even spoke. I handed him the receiver. Wolfe said, "Inspector." Kramer spoke fast, excited and annoyed at his own excitement. Subpoena worked. Refunds issued to Northdock Services, small ones, lots of them. Always just under the audit threshold, spread across departments, so nobody sees a pile. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Amounts. 2,900, Kramer said. 3,150, 2,770. 5, stuff like that. Never a clean round number, never big enough to trigger a review. It's like somebody read the manual on how to be boring. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Boredom is the preferred disguise of thieves. Kramer snorted. Yeah, well, boredom just bought them a trip to jail. You want copies? Yes, Wolfe said. Bring them, and do not let your officers smudge them with fingerprints of enthusiasm. Wolfe hung up and placed the receiver down with care, as if it had become evidence. He looked at me. Archie, we have the mechanism now. We must secure the human link. I'm guessing Kramer wants to arrest Mason Klein before dinner, I said. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Kramer wants to arrest someone before lunch, and then take credit for digestion. We will proceed correctly. I leaned back in my chair. Refunds to Northdock Services. That means the invoice duplication is not a harmless correction. It is a manufacturing process. Wolfe nodded slightly. A duplicate creates an overpayment. An overpayment justifies a refund. The refund is the theft, disguised as rectification. And Northdock is the mailbox, I said. Wolfe's mouth tightened. It may be a mailbox. It may be a shell. It may be a human being with a rented address and no conscience. In any case, it is a conduit. The doorbell rang then, which was perfect timing, if you like. Your life orchestrated by irritation. Fritz brought in Kramer's messenger, a plainclothes detective with a thick folder. He handed it to me, nodded at Wolfe, as if unsure whether Wolfe required greeting, and left quickly as if the house might ask him questions. I brought the folder to Wolfe. He opened it, scanned the pages, and his eyes became colder with each line. Refund record after refund record, Northdock Services. Amounts just below the threshold that triggers the building's internal audit process. Different departments listed as originators, as if the refunds were distributed at random. Wolfe looked up. Spreading the refunds across departments is a crude form of camouflage. It relies on the laziness of separate silos. It's working, I said, until someone gets killed in a corridor and an invoice clerk gets curious. Wolfe's gaze held. Curiosity is inconvenient for criminals. It is why they fear competent clerks more than police. That was Wolfe being generous in his way, I said. So we confront Mason. Yes, Wolfe replied. You will go to Ridgeway Tower. You will confront Mr. Klein and observe his reaction to the word refunds. Do you want me to waive these papers? I asked. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Do not waive anything. Waiving suggests uncertainty. You will mention the existence of refund records as an established fact and watch his face. That will provide more than a page ever could. I went. Ridgeway Tower's finance floor was as tense as a violin string. January had everyone pretending they had control, which meant they were extra sensitive to the idea that someone might notice they did not. Mason Klein was in his office. His door was closed, which is usually a sign of either concentration or fear. I knocked, entered, and found him at his desk with a screen full of numbers and a posture full of righteousness. He looked up and his expression tightened, the patience of yesterday replaced by irritation. Mr. Goodwin, Mason, I said. You look busy. I am busy, he said, voice clipped. If you are here to accuse me again, I have work. I'm here to ask you about Northdock Services, I said. His jaw tightened. I already told you, it's a temporary contractor, temporary enough to receive multiple refunds, I said. His eyes flickered. It was small, but it was there. A man does not enjoy hearing the word refunds when he has been using them as a mask. He recovered quickly. Refunds are common in January. Vendors are overpaid. Corrections happen. That is the entire point of finance. The refunds are just below audit thresholds, I said. Mason's expression hardened. If you know internal thresholds, then you have been speaking to people who should not be sharing them. That's a fine distraction, I said. Now produce Northdock's contract. Mason blinked. Contract? Yes, I said. The vendor agreement, the scope, the W-9, the contact person, the service description. Since they're temporary, it should be easy. Mason's mouth tightened. Procurement has those. Then call procurement, I said. Now, Mason stared at me for a beat too long, and I could see the calculation. A man who can call procurement without fear will do it quickly, to make you look foolish. A man who cannot will try to make you go away. Mason chose the second. I am not required to perform your investigation for you, he said. That's true, I said, but you are required not to approve theft. His face flushed. This is absurd. I leaned forward slightly. Absurd is a contractor dead in a corridor and a finance supervisor entering the building at 6:05 a.m. the next morning. His eyes sharpened. You are misusing badge logs. I'm using them accurately, I said. Why were you in the building at 6:05? Mason's voice was tight. I came early to deal with January backlog. You never delegate, I said. His eyes narrowed. What? I spoke to your assistant, I said, which was partially true. I had spoken to someone who worked near his assistant and who was not good at keeping quiet. She says you insisted on personally handling early January corrections. You never delegate. Mason's jaw clenched. That's because I'm responsible. Or because you're protecting something, I said. He stood abruptly. You are out of line. I stood too because sometimes matching a man's posture is the only way to keep him from thinking he can tower. I will ask once more, produce Northdock's contract. Mason's shoulders were tight. His eyes had a hard sheen. He said, I can't. It came out too fast, too honest. Then he corrected himself, because people who edit their sentences are always late to their own truth. I mean, I don't have it here. I smiled slightly. Now that's closer to an answer. Who does have it? Mason's lips pressed together. I let the silence work. Silence is Wolfe's favorite tool, and it works on most men because most men cannot bear empty air. Mason finally said, voice flat, Northdock's arrangement was handled informally. Informally, I repeated. In a building that worships procedure. Mason's face tightened again. It was temporary. A short-term solution. A short-term solution that received a long-term stream of refunds, I said. That's not a contractor, Mason, that's a funnel. His eyes flashed. Leave. I will, I said, but I will also tell you something. Nero Wolfe does not care about your explanations. He cares about your habits. Your habit is neatness. Neatness in a criminal is never innocent. I left his office and went straight to Jenna Cross. Jenna was in a small payroll cubicle area that looked like it had been designed to keep humans from developing individuality. She rose when she saw me, anxious eyes bright. What did he say? She asked. He tried to call Northdock a temporary contractor without a contract, I said. He also got tense when I mentioned refunds. Jenna swallowed. Refunds? Yes, I said. Wolfe has records now. Northdock got multiple refunds just under audit thresholds, spread across departments. Jenna's eyes widened. So, it's real. It's real theft, I said. Now tell me again about the minor error you saw. Jenna looked down at her hands, then back up. It wasn't random. The vendor name field flickered. For a second it showed Ridgeway Security Desk. Then it was replaced with Northdock Services. My mind clicked. That means, I said slowly, the charge originally pointed inward. Jenna nodded. Yes, like it was supposed to be internal, and then someone moved it outward. Because internal siphoning would raise internal questions, I said, but refunds to an external vendor can be explained as routine cleanup. Jenna's voice was tight. That's why it looked like an adjustment. That's why Wolfe hates tiredness, I said. Tired people forgive. Forgiveness is expensive. Jenna swallowed. What happens now? Now Wolfe wants the link between finance edits and corridor access, I said, and he wants it clean enough that even Kramer can't stomp on it. Jenna looked frightened. Can I help? You already did, I said, but Wolfe has another use for you. Her eyes widened. What? Back at the brownstone. Wolfe listened without moving as I delivered the pieces. Mason's inability to produce a contract, his admission of an informal arrangement, Jenna's revelation that the vendor name had briefly shown Ridgeway Security Desk before being replaced. Wolfe's eyes narrowed in satisfaction that looked like displeasure. Satisfaction always looks like displeasure on Wolfe. He considers smiling frivolous. That confirms internal origin, Wolfe said. The charge was born in an internal department, then exported to a shell. That is not error. That is laundering, I said. It also means someone with access to the security desk template and the finance correction system is involved. Yes, Wolfe said. The overlap narrows the suspects. And Warren Pike, I said. Stumbled onto the scheme while working late. He saw the petty cash room, the escort fee envelopes, maybe the safe, and he connected it to the ledger. Then he was removed and staged as an accident. Wolfe's voice was quiet. He was a contractor. He was assumed to be ignorant. That assumption killed him. I leaned forward. Kramer will want to arrest Mason now. Wolfe's mouth tightened. He may arrest anyone he chooses. I prefer the correct person, for the correct reason at the correct time. That's your prayer, I said. It is my requirement, Wolfe replied. Now we require proof of the human link between finance edits and corridor access. You have established motive and mechanism. We need behavior. Behavior, I said, meaning someone who watches the ledger obsessively. Wolfe nodded. Yes, the person who performs early morning corrections is not merely diligent. He is monitoring. Therefore, we will offer him a stimulus. He looked at me, eyes cold and exact. Jenna Cross will enter a fresh duplicated charge. I blinked. That's risky. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. It is bait, visible only to whoever watches the ledger obsessively. If we do it correctly, it will provoke action. Action is evidence, I said. Kramer will complain. Wolfe's gaze held mine. Kramer complains when he breathes. Ignore him. He reached for his beer and took a deliberate sip, as if sealing the plan. You will instruct Miss Cross, Wolfe said. She will enter the duplicated charge at a precise time, and she will do it in a way that appears accidental. We will then watch who moves first, who corrects first, and from where. I nodded slowly. And if they correct it, we catch them with their hand in the ledger. Wolfe's voice was soft. We catch them with their habit exposed. The habit is always more damning than the isolated act. People can explain an act. They cannot explain a pattern without revealing intent. I thought of the service corridor, the scuffed latch, the envelope stub stamped escort fee, the camera gaps labeled system restart, all neat, all forgivable if you were tired and wanted to go home. Wolfe had no interest in going home. He was already home, in his chair, and from there he intended to make Ridgeway Tower stop forgiving. He said, "All right, I'll tell Jenna." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Do so. And Archie." "Yes, make sure the duplicated charge is irresistible," Wolfe said. "Criminals are like orchids. They respond predictably to the proper stimulus." I stood, took my coat, and headed for the door. Outside, January kept moving, brisk and cold, giving everyone the illusion of a clean beginning. Inside Wolfe's office, the trap had been set, and the month's routine was about to confess. Chapter 6. The editor takes the bait when you set bait for a fish. You do not get to choose which fish bites. You only learn what lives in the water. Wolfe, naturally, claims he always knows which fish. Jenna Cross made the duplicated entry the way Wolfe instructed, which meant she did it in a way that would look like the building itself had done it by accident. She entered it under a category that Ridgeway Tower forgives the way a priest forgives sin, because everyone relies on it and nobody enjoys inspecting it. After, Ha's escort fee. Vendor field left as it auto. Filled amount just under the threshold where questions start. Description bland enough to pass unnoticed by any tired clerk. Then she left it alone. The idea was simple. A normal system would catch it later. During routine reconciliation, an obsessed watcher would catch it immediately, because the watcher is not reconciling. He is protecting. Wolfe sat in his chair at the brownstone, content as a spider that has just felt a tremor on its web, and sent me to Ridgeway Tower because spiders do not do elevators. I was in the lobby when Jenna texted me, a message so short it looked like fear had clipped it. It's gone, corrected already. I checked my watch. 2 hours. Not even enough time for the building's finance people to pretend they had opened their day. I called Wolfe. He answered, as if he had been holding the receiver. Yes. The bait entry has been corrected, I said. 2 hours. There was a pause that was not surprise. Wolfe does not enjoy surprise. He enjoys confirmation. Excellent, he said. That word again, I muttered. Wolfe ignored me. You will now locate the hand that corrected it. That's why I'm here, I said. Wolfe's voice was calm. Good, proceed. I hung up and went to the finance floor, where Jenna met me with eyes wide and fingers cold. It was corrected before I could even breathe, she said. Show me the log trail, I said. She led me to a terminal, pulled up the entry history and pointed. The duplicated invoice had been edited and the vendor replaced. It had been done neatly, the way the other ones were done, as if the correction itself were a form of pride. The approval signature on the correction was Mason Klein's credentials. Jenna blinked. It says Mason. Where is Mason? I asked. In a budget meeting, she said, with witnesses, 3 department heads, and the finance director. It started an hour ago. That was useful. Witnesses do not prove innocence, but they do force a liar to choose a better lie, I said. So either someone knows his login, or Mason is coordinating with someone who can edit remotely. Jenna's face tightened. Who would know his login? A person who believes records belong to him, I said. Or a person he trusts, which is rarer. Jenna swallowed. Can you prove where the correction came from? I can try, I said, and Wolfe will demand it. At Ridgeway Tower, proving where something came from means crawling through a system designed to make responsibility vague. That is why criminals enjoy corporate structures. They can hide behind accounts, templates, and shared passwords that are officially forbidden and unofficially universal. I called Kramer and told him I needed it logs for the correction. Kramer's response was a grunt that meant he disliked the idea, but would do it because Wolfe's cases, when they smell right, tend to end in arrests. Within 40 minutes, a tired technician met me in a small glass office near the security desk. He had the expression of a man who would rather be resetting someone's email password than assisting homicide. You want what? He said. Login and terminal source for an admin correction, I said, made under Mason Klein's credentials within the last 2 hours. It corrected an invoice entry. The technician frowned. That's finance. It's also murder, I said. He sighed and typed. He pulled up authentication logs. The screen showed a timestamp, a user credential, and an origin terminal ID, he pointed. Here, correction made under Mason Klein's credentials, but not from his office terminal. From where? I asked. He clicked. Terminal located near the security desk. Operations kiosk, the one used for visitor badges and quick access checks. I felt a small thrill and a small disgust. A finance correction made at a security desk terminal meant the boundary between money and movement had been dissolved. Print it, I said. He hesitated. I'm not supposed to print sensitive logs. I leaned in. You're not supposed to allow a murder investigation to be delayed either. He printed. I took the paper and looked across the lobby to the security desk. The guards sat behind their monitors, faces blank, believing their world was routine. Somebody had used their terminal to edit a financial record using a supervisor's credentials. That somebody was either very bold or very comfortable. I called Wolfe again. Mason's credentials were used, but the correction was made from a terminal near the security desk, I said. Operations kiosk. Wolfe's voice was quiet. So the editor is near the point of movement, not the point of bookkeeping. Yes, I said, which points toward operations. Wolfe said, proceed. That was Wolfe's version of applause. I went back to Nolan Reed. I found him in the operations office, the same bridge. Like room of monitors and schedules, he looked up as I entered, and his smile arrived a beat too late, like a man stepping into a role. Mr. Goodwin, he said, this is becoming a routine for you. It's becoming a routine for someone else too, I said, and routines are now suspect. Nolan's eyes tightened slightly. You again. I held up the printed log. A correction was made under Mason Klein's credentials. Not from his office. From a terminal near the security desk. The operations. Kiosk. Nolan's smile thinned. So someone used the kiosk. Someone with access, I said. Someone who knows the right systems. Someone comfortable at the security desk. Nolan's eyes sharpened. Are you accusing me of fraud now too? I'm accusing you of being defensive, I said. And you are. You always get defensive when paperwork gets close to your operations. His jaw tightened. Because paperwork people interfere with building operations. They create delays. They demand forms. They don't understand that buildings need flow. I let him talk because Wolfe had taught me that men reveal their philosophy when they are irritated. Philosophy is often motive with better grammar, Nolan continued, voice tightening. If you start disrupting vendor access, maintenance schedules, security procedures, you create risk, you create complaints. Tenants complain, owners complain, then everyone blames operations. I said, better complaints than corpses. Nolan's eyes flashed. That contractor's death is not on me. Then stop acting like it is, I said. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His hands moved on the desk, touching a pen, moving it, touching it again. Small, restless adjustments. A man who needs control will fidget when he loses it. I said, where were you at 11:30? 8 the night Warren Pike entered the building. Nolan's smile returned. Too neat, at home. I'm sure you were, I said. And yet Kramer's people tell me a master key was signed out that night. Nolan's face tightened. Master key. Yes, I said. A master key for service doors. Nolan's gaze flicked away. I don't manage keys. Security does. But you manage schedules, I said. You manage access. You manage flow. You know every habit and shortcut in this building, and you hate it when finance people look at your habits. Nolan's voice sharpened. This is harassment. It's investigation, I said. And now we're going to do something you'll hate. We're going to look at your paperwork. He straightened. My paperwork is in order. That's what every thief says right before he discovers Wolfe does not forgive order, I said. I left him and went straight to Kramer, who was in a conference room with 2 detectives and the kind of expression that says he has found a lever. He held up a sheet. Nolan Reed signed out a master key the night Pike died. How do you know? I asked. Security key cabinet log, Kramer said. Signed out at 10:20, one returned at 1:15, initials match Reed's admin ID. I nodded slowly. That key could open the storage room door. Kramer's eyes narrowed, and probably the corridor doors, side doors. Any door the building wants to pretend is always locked. That's movement, I said. And Mason is records. Kramer grunted. Wolfe's theory. It's not a theory now, I said. It's a picture. I went back upstairs, not to Nolan's office this time, but to his desk, when he was distracted by a call and had stepped into the adjacent room. The operations office has glass walls. It is designed to show transparency while still hiding details. People can see you are busy. They cannot see what you are doing. Nolan's desk was tidy but not personal. No family photos, no trinkets, just tools. That kind of desk belongs to a man who thinks of himself as a function. I slid open a drawer. Inside was a printed list of dates and amounts. Refund dates, refund amounts, Northdock Services. Finance data Nolan Reed should not have had. I felt a chill. A man with that list is not a casual operations coordinator, he is a partner in theft. I snapped a photo with my phone, then replaced the paper exactly as I found it. Neatness is not just for criminals. It's for assistants who do not want to be noticed. I walked out and called Wolfe. Wolfe answered at once. Yes. The bait was corrected from the security desk terminal using Mason's credentials, I said. Not from Mason's office. Also, Kramer found Nolan Reed, signed out a master key the night Warren Pike died, and I just found a printed list in Nolan's desk with refund dates and amounts to Northdock Services. Wolfe was silent for a moment, then said, "Now we have the human link." "Yes," I said. "Nolan has finance data he shouldn't. He's coordinating." Wolfe's voice was quiet, satisfied in that grim Wolfe way. Nolan controls movement. Mason controls records. January adjustments cover both. "So what now?" I asked. Though I already knew. Wolfe said, "Now we end it. We will gather them, and we will force routine to speak." I could picture him in his office, the brownstones steady around him, orchids above, beer at hand, as if the world's disorder were merely a puzzle he could correct. Wolfe said, "Archie." "Yes." "A minor mistake is a major invitation," Wolfe said, "to whoever is waiting."
I looked across the lobby at the security desk, at the guards and the monitors, at the building's polished certainty. Somewhere in that polished system, a man had been waiting, watching a ledger obsessively, correcting too quickly, moving money as if money were just another item to escort through a door. He had taken the bait. Now Wolfe would set the hook. Chapter 7, Wolfe's Lesson on Habit. If you want to see Nero Wolfe at his most dangerous, do not watch him when he is angry. Watch him when he is calm and has arranged chairs. Anger is easy. It spends itself. Wolfe's calm is an investment. That evening the brownstone was warm in the way only a well-run house can be warm, with heat that felt earned and food smells that made you think for half a second that the world might not be entirely rotten. Fritz had prepared supper with the quiet confidence of a man who trusts onions and patience more than he trusts human nature. From the dining room drifted the scent of roast and brown butter and something sharp, likely mustard, which for Fritz is a form of punctuation. Wolfe ate at the correct hour, as always, and drank a beer afterward, as always, and then returned to the office, as if stepping back into duty. He did not hurry. Wolfe never hurries. He makes other people hurry and then calls it efficiency. By 7:30 the chairs were arranged. Wolfe's own chair behind the desk was not merely a seat. It was a throne with paperwork. The red leather chairs for visitors faced him like an audience that had paid too much for admission. I was at my desk, pen ready, though Wolfe insists he does not need my notes. He says that as if my notes are for him, they are for me and for the world, which needs documentation when Wolfe is finished with it. Upstairs the plant rooms were a steady presence even unseen. The orchids had been watered and inspected on schedule. Theodore was likely in his room with a book and an expression of distrust for the century. The brownstone, in other words, was itself. That was important, because Wolfe intended to demonstrate how routine can be either a comfort or a weapon. The doorbell rang at 8:08, which meant Wolfe had timed his invitations with his usual arrogance. I answered, and found Inspector Kramer first. As expected, Kramer entered with his coat collar up and his face set like a man heading into argument. Behind him came Jenna Cross, pale but determined, clutching her folder as if it were armor. Kramer nodded toward the office. "You got your circus ready." "I always have the ring swept," I said. Jenna looked around with anxious eyes. "I've never been here." "Most people only come once," I told her. "Try to make it memorable for the right reasons." Next came Mason Caline, finance supervisor, neat suit, neat hair, neat irritation. He looked at the brownstone as if it were an antique he had not budgeted for. His eyes took in the rug, the shelves, Wolfe's desk, and he made a small tightening of his lips at the sight of a household that does not pretend it is efficient. "It is efficient without claiming it," Mason said. "Mr. Goodwin." "Mason," I said. "You are on time." That must have been difficult. He ignored. That last came Nolan Reed, operations coordinator, wearing the same controlled smile he wore in Ridgeway Tower, the smile of a man who believes the building's systems are his personal instruments. He glanced around the office with a brief dismissive curiosity and then looked straight at Wolfe's chair as if he intended to argue with it. Nolan said, Mr. Wolfe is not coming down to Ridgeway then. He is here, I said. He finds it more economical to make criminals climb stairs. I led them into the office. Wolfe sat already behind his desk, hands folded, expression severe enough to make men wish they had brought lawyers. He did not rise. Wolfe rises for orchids, not for suspects. Good evening, Wolfe said, and the phrase sounded like a judgment. Sit. They sat. Jenna sat on the edge of her chair as if ready to flee. Mason sat upright with the posture of a man who believes he can explain anything with policy. Nolan lounged slightly, an insult disguised as ease. Kramer remained standing for a moment, then dropped into a chair with a grunt. Wolfe looked at them, one by one, letting the silence do its work. Silence in Wolfe's hands is a tool that scrapes at people until they reveal where they are tender. Finally Wolfe spoke. We are here because Ridgeway Tower has suffered a murder. Warren Pike is dead. He was struck and placed to resemble an accident. That murder is attached, by habit, to a scheme that you have all treated as routine. Nolan opened his mouth, but Wolfe lifted a hand slightly. Nolan stopped. Wolfe can stop people with a hand, the way other men stop them with a fist. Wolfe continued, voice calm. Before I identify the murderer and the accomplice, I will state a principle. Honest mistakes are corrected when noticed. Fraudulent mistakes are corrected before anyone notices. Mason shifted in his chair. Nolan's smile thinned. Jenna stared at Wolfe as if afraid to blink. Wolfe looked directly at Jenna. Miss Cross, you came to my house because you observed an adjustment that was too neat. You were correct to do so. Tired people forgive errors. Competent people investigate them. Jenna's throat moved as she swallowed. I just thought it was wrong. It was wrong, Wolfe said, and now it is lethal. He turned his gaze to Mason Klein. Mr. Klein, you call your early morning edits cleanup. You call them January adjustments. You rely on a comforting myth shared by many offices that habits reset in January. Mason's voice was controlled. Habits do not reset. Work continues. Corrections are routine. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Indeed, habits do not reset. That is why you are here. I watched Mason's hands. They were clasped, but his thumb rubbed the edge of his index finger. A small repetitive motion, habit revealing stress. Wolfe said, Archie. I slid a folder across to Wolfe, containing the printed it logs and key cabinet sign-outs, and the refund records. Wolfe did not need me to hand it to him, but he preferred ceremony in conclusions. He enjoys demonstrating that evidence is an object, not a rumor. Wolfe lifted a page and held it up. These are authentication logs from Ridgeway Tower. They show an invoice correction entered under Mr. Klein's credentials, but not from his office terminal. The correction was made from a terminal adjacent to the security desk. Nolan's eyes sharpened. Mason's face tightened. Wolfe placed that page down and lifted another. These are key cabinet logs. They show that Mr. Reed signed out a master key the night Warren Pike died. That key permits access to service corridors and utility rooms, including the petty cash storage room where escort fee envelopes were stamped. Nolan leaned forward, voice quick. That key is used for operations. It's normal. Wolfe looked at him as if examining a stain. Normal is not an argument. Normal is a method. Nolan's jaw clenched. Jenna looked down at her hands. Wolfe continued. Mr. Reed, you control movement. You control access. You know how to make a corridor quiet, and a door obedient. Mr. Klein, you control records. You know how to make a ledger appear clean and a refund appear justified. The scheme required both. That is why the edits were neat and the camera restarts were labeled system maintenance. Paper and corridors were treated the same, corrected. Kramer made a sound that might have been a cough or might have been impatience. He leaned forward. Wolfe, you want me to arrest them or what? Wolfe's eyes did not shift. In time, Inspector. Mason's voice cut in, tight. If my credentials were used at the security desk terminal. Then Mr. Reed stole my password. Nolan turned quickly offended. I did not. Mason snapped. Then explain why my login was used from your area. Wolfe raised a hand again. They stopped, reluctantly, like dogs hearing a whistle. Wolfe looked at Mason. Your attempt is predictable, Mr. Klein. Blame Mr. Reed for stealing your password. It is plausible in the way all lazy explanations are plausible. Unfortunately for you, refund approvals still required your direct signature. Mason's face reddened slightly. My signature is electronic. It can be misused. Wolfe's voice remained calm. It was misused repeatedly. Then, that is not a security flaw, that is a partnership. Nolan gave a short laugh too sharp. This is ridiculous. A junior clerk sees a minor vendor name issue and suddenly we have a grand conspiracy. People love drama. Jenna's face tightened and she started to speak. But Wolfe cut in before she could. Be silent, Wolfe said, not loudly, but with a force that made Nolan's smile vanish. Miss Cross's concern was not minor. Your dismissal reveals your arrogance. You lived inside routine and believed routine would protect you. Routine exposes intent. Nolan's eyes flashed. We run a building. Systems are complex. Corrections happen. Wolfe's gaze held him. Corrections happen when they are warranted. Your corrections happened when they were useful. I could feel the air in the office thicken. This is a sensation you learn in homicide cases. It is the moment when people realize the conversation has moved from explanation to consequence. Kramer reached into his coat and pulled out an evidence bag. Inside was a phone, scuffed and sealed. Kramer placed it on Wolfe's desk. This is Warren Pike's phone, Kramer said. We got into it. He took a photo the night he died. Wolfe did not touch the bag. He nodded to me. I took it, opened it carefully, and pulled out a printed image Kramer's men had prepared. It was a phone photo of a sheet of paper. The sheet was a refund list. At the top, handwritten, was the word Northdock. Even without handwriting analysis, you could tell it was written by someone who thought labels mattered more than truth.
The ink was dark, the letters firm, the kind of hand that enjoys control, Kramer said. Photo timestamp is 11:16 p.m. Warren Pike took it hours before he died. The office went quiet. Jenna's hands tightened around her folder. Mason stared at the photo as if it were a personal insult. Nolan's face went pale in a slow, controlled way, as if he were trying to keep his skin from betraying him. Wolfe's voice was soft. So, the minor error is a motive for murder. Mr. Pike observed your scheme. He photographed evidence. He became inconvenient. He was removed. Nolan's voice came out low. That proves nothing about me. Wolfe looked at him. It proves he had access to a refund sheet labeled Northdock. It proves he saw what he should not have seen, and it proves someone killed him to stop him speaking. You may argue about which of you struck him. You may argue about which of you edited which record, but the structure is now visible. Mason's voice rose, strained. I did not kill anyone. Wolfe nodded slightly. Perhaps not. You may only have stolen, but theft is rarely content to remain theft when discovered. Nolan's mouth tightened. You can't sit there and declare things. You haven't even been to Ridgeway. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. I do not need to visit a corridor to understand a habit. Habits are consistent. You treated the building as your instrument. You treated finance as your eraser. You treated January as your camouflage. He leaned forward slightly, the smallest shift, but it carried weight because Wolfe almost never leans forward. Now you will learn the final lesson. A building is not protected by locks. A scheme is not protected by neatness. Both are defeated by attention. Kramer shifted, ready. As if the cuffs were already in his hands, Wolfe looked at me. Archie read the Times. I had them in my notebook. I read them aloud, one by one, because reading Times in Wolfe's office is like reading charges. Warren Pike entered Ridgeway Tower at 11:30, 8 p.m. His work order was listed as routine maintenance. The corridor camera feed from 11:30 to midnight was missing. Labeled system restart. Refund corrections to Northdock Services were processed early mornings, usually around 8. Mason Klein entered the building at 6:05 a.m. The day after Pike's death, Nolan Reed signed out a master key at 10:20, 1 p.m., and returned it at 1:15 a.m. As I read, Nolan's face tightened further. Mason's eyes shifted, hunting for an escape path. Jenna sat very still, as if afraid movement would make the room worse. Kramer looked satisfied. The way he looks when he has a case he can actually take to a judge. Wolfe nodded once. Thank you. He looked at Mason and Nolan. You may attempt more revisions. They will not help. Mr. Reed, your access, and your possession of finance refund data establish your role. Mr. Klein, your approvals and your early morning presence establish yours. The only remaining question is which of you struck Mr. Pike and which of you assisted afterward. Mason swallowed. If Reed did it, I didn't know. Nolan snapped. You approved the refunds. Mason's voice rose. You moved the money. You arranged access. Nolan's hands clenched on the chair arms. And you cleaned it. Wolfe let them speak for a few seconds because sometimes the guilty will do the work for you when they believe they are only fighting each other. Then Wolfe spoke again, and the room quieted like a dog kennel when the owner enters. This is enough, Wolfe said. Inspector, you may proceed. Kramer stood. His chair scraped the rug, loud in the silence. He looked at Wolfe, then at the two men. All right, Kramer said. Mason Klein, Nolan Reed. You're coming with me. Mason's face went gray. Nolan's expression hardened into anger. But anger was too late. Anger is useless once a man's habits have been read aloud. Jenna exhaled shakily, as if she had been holding her breath since she first noticed the vendor name flicker. As Kramer's men moved in, Wolfe leaned back in his chair, calm again, as if the case were already finished. For him, it nearly was. The office gathering had done its job. Routine had been forced to speak. I looked at the photo of Warren Pike's refund sheet labeled Northdock and felt the weight of how small things become deadly. A duplicated charge, a vendor name replaced, a corridor camera restarted, a master key signed out, a contractor who took one picture at 11:16 p.m. and paid for it with his life. The brownstone stayed warm. Fritz's cooking smell lingered upstairs. The orchids kept their schedule. Wolfe's world remained orderly. Outside, somewhere, Ridgeway Tower would keep beeping and sighing, and tired people would keep forgiving small errors. At least for tonight, Wolfe had made forgiveness impossible. Chapter 8. The first week mistake after Inspector Kramer had escorted Mason Klein and Nolan Reed out of Wolfe's office. The brownstone did not erupt into celebration. That is not our style. Wolfe dislikes triumph, the way he dislikes cheap cigars. It lingers and makes everything smell smaller than it is. There was, however, a change in the air. The room had been thick with tension, the kind that makes even the rugs seem attentive. Once the cuffs clicked and the footsteps went down the hall, the office became itself again. The lamplight looked warmer. The silence returned to being a choice instead of a weapon. Fritz's cooking smell drifted faintly from downstairs like a reminder that in this house, at least, routine has dignity. Jenna Cross remained seated, hands still folded around her folder, eyes fixed on a spot on Wolfe's rug, as if she expected the pattern to move. She looked relieved and frightened at the same time, which is a reasonable expression for anyone who has just learned that noticing a small thing can get a man killed. Wolfe sat behind his desk, immense, composed, and mildly displeased, because even when he wins he must endure the waste of human behavior. His gaze moved to Jenna. "Miss Cross," he said, "you may go now." Jenna looked up quickly. "Is it over?" "It is concluded," Wolfe replied. "In law, nothing is ever over. In reason, it is finished." She stood, still clutching her folder. "Thank you," she said, voice thin. Wolfe nodded once. He does not accept gratitude. He endures it. I walked her to the door. At the threshold she paused and looked back, as if the room might call her name again. "I only saw a flicker," she said softly. The vendor field, for a second it said Ridgeway Security Desk. Then it changed. "That was enough," I said. "Wolfe's favorite amount." She gave me a small, shaky smile and left. When I returned, Wolfe was looking at the empty visitor chair as if it were an object that had disappointed him. "Beer," he said. I poured it. Wolfe took a sip, not for pleasure alone, but as a gesture that the day's work had reached its proper stage. He looked at me. "You will now tell me," he said, "what Kramer will tell us in 5 minutes." "I can guess," I said. "Confessions." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Do not guess. Think. I thought. Mason built the scheme, Nolan moved it. Wolfe nodded slightly. Yes, but speak it accurately. That was Wolfe. Accuracy is his comfort. The phone rang on cue, as if Kramer had been trained by Fritz, I answered. Kramer's voice was rough with satisfaction and anger, the way it gets when he has the truth but wishes it had been simpler. We got it, he said. Both of them. Mason sang first. I held the receiver out to Wolfe. Wolfe said, Inspector. Kramer spoke fast. Mason set up the whole thing. Duplicate charges, then corrections that turned into refunds paid to Northdock Services. Northdock is a shell he controlled. Mailbox set up, bank account under a name that's clean on paper and dirty everywhere else. Wolfe's eyes did not change. And Mr. Reed. Kramer snorted. Reed helped. He handled after hours access. Got contractors in and out, controlled the corridor cameras. Those restarts weren't glitches, they were scheduled blind spots. Reed had the master key, he had the habit windows, he knew where nobody looked. Wolfe's voice was calm. The murder. Kramer's voice tightened. Pike saw something. Envelope stub in that utility room. Escort fee. He got curious, took a photo of a refund sheet labeled Northdock, then confronted Reed. I could hear paper rustling on Kramer's end, like he was reading from a report and enjoying it. Kramer continued. Pike threatened to go to the building owner. Reed hit him in the corridor, from behind. One strike. Then he placed him to look like a fall, thought everybody would swallow contractor accident and move on. Wolfe's mouth tightened slightly, not in surprise, but in contempt, and Mr. Klein's early morning entry. Kramer said, Clean up. Mason came in at 6:05 next morning to erase Pike's connection to the ledger trail, changed vendor names, pushed refunds, cleaned the correction queue. He expected the first, weak excuse to cover everything. Wolfe's eyes stayed steady. It did not. Because your clerk saw the swap, Kramer growled. Yeah, that's what Mason keeps cursing about, says if that girl had minded her own business. Pike's death would have been written off and they'd still be collecting. Wolfe's voice went colder. He is correct about one thing. Competent people are inconvenient, Kramer said. You want them brought back for a formal statement in your office. No, Wolfe said. You have them. That is sufficient. I am not a courtroom. Kramer snorted. You're worse. You're a lecture hall. I'll see you later. Wolfe hung up and set the receiver down with care. I exhaled slowly. So it's all as we thought. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. It is as reason required. I leaned back at my desk. The case, like most Wolfe cases, had taken something modern and made it old-fashioned. It had been about envelopes and keys and human weakness disguised as procedure. Northdock Services, I said. A shell with a mailbox and a bank account. Wolfe nodded. A name that could be typed into a drop-down list and accepted because people were tired. That is the great weakness of systems. They rely on human boredom. And Nolan, I said. He kept movement smooth, cameras blind. Yes, Wolfe said. He believed routine was his ally. It was his accomplice, until it became his betrayal. I stared at the rug, thinking of the scuffed utility door latch, the stamped stub, the neat early morning edits, the corridor camera restarts, labeled as maintenance. The murder had not been loud. It had been filed. Warren Pike wasn't supposed to see it, I said. Wolfe's gaze was distant. He was a contractor. In such buildings, contractors are treated as furniture. People do not expect furniture to observe. When it does, they remove it. That line landed in the room like a weight. Wolfe can be brutal when he is describing a simple truth. Brutality is easier for him than sympathy, I said. Mason's early morning cleanup. He tried to erase Warren's connection to the ledger trail. Yes, Wolfe replied. He believed he could correct the world the way he corrected an invoice. Replace a name, remove a trace, restore comfort. And Jenna's eye ruined it, I said. Wolfe nodded once. A small mistake, dismissed. until it proved intent. He leaned back, hands resting on the arms of his chair. The office was quiet again. The brownstone felt solid, as if the whole city could lean on it and be steadied. Wolfe said softly, "January is a month of myths. One myth is that the year begins clean. It does not, it continues. Habits do not reset overnight. They continue, and criminals depend on that continuity." I looked out the window. West 35th Street was dark and cold, headlights sliding over wet pavement, people moving quickly, collars up, minds already turned toward tomorrow's obligations. The city was returning to routine, as it always does, because routine is how New York survives itself. But I could not shake Wolfe's warning. The first week is not harmless. It is the mask. Everyone expects wobble, so thieves hide in it. Everyone expects mistakes, so criminals manufacture them. Downstairs, Fritz began clearing supper dishes with quiet efficiency. Above us, the orchids waited in their controlled warmth, indifferent to finance schemes and dead contractors. Wolfe's world would resume its schedule exactly, because Wolfe insists on it. I sat at my desk and wrote the final lines of my report, because writing is my way of keeping facts from being edited after the fact. The case had ended where it began, with something small, a duplicated charge, a vendor swap, a minor error everyone forgave, until it stopped being minor and started being a motive. I watched the street a moment longer and thought that Wolfe was right, as he so often is in the most irritating ways. The year does not begin clean. It begins continuing.